Okay, in this video, I'm going to talk about inverse functions. And I'm going to start off talking about a function which is f of x. And this is a very familiar function to us. We've seen it before, maybe in a familiar form, y equals 3x plus 2. But same idea either way. We've got pairs, we've got numbers that go in and numbers that we get out as output. Now, I'm going to tell you here some more information. I'm going to tell you that your domain is going to be restricted. Your domain, your set of x values, is only allowed to be the set 0, 1, and 2. Why did I decide that? I just decided to make a very small problem for the purposes of this video. So I'm giving you a very restricted domain just because that was my choice. Okay, in general, you might have a very big domain, like the set of all real numbers. Now, let's take a look at a picture of what this function would look like. So we have in our domain, our starting set, we have the number 0, 1, and 2. And I'm going to label that domain. Now, my set of output values, we have to see what are we going to get. So when I take 0 as my input, so let's take x equals 0 as my input value. I want to figure out where does it go? Where does it get mapped? Well, I know what the rule is. The rule says take your x equals 0 and plug it in wherever you saw 0. I'm going to have 3 times 0 plus 2, and that's going to give me a value of 2. So that means in went 0 and out comes a 2. So one way of writing that is that f of 0 is 2. That means if 0 is my input, when I f it, I'm going to get a 2 as my output. Now, we can similarly go through the rest of the calculations here. When x equals 1, what happens there? Well, we had f of x, which is 1, equals 3 times 1 plus 2. So that's going to give us 3 plus 2. That gives us 5. So we know what the output value is going to be. In went a 1 and out came a 5. And lastly, if I look at the value of 2, when x equals 2, f of 2, what happens? I'm plugging in 2 everywhere I see an x. And so I get 6 plus 2 is 8. So 8 is my output value. And here I have a function. Okay, so this purple graph is f. I went from my domain to my range. So an inverse function does exactly the opposite. So the inverse function maps points or elements in the range to the domain. And the notation we often use for the inverse function looks like f with a superscript minus 1. Now notice, I just be very, very careful here. Normally if I saw, 7 to the negative 1, I would assume that that means 7 goes in the denominator. That means the multiplicative inverse. Okay, but the notation f of negative 1 does not mean 1 over f. Okay, that's not what we mean. That negative 1, written as a superscript on the f, means the inverse function. It means go backwards. Okay, undo your function. Let me draw a picture. So the inverse function is going to take elements from my range, like 2, and it's going to go backwards to what was the pre-image. So f inverse, the backwards or the inverse image of 2 gives me 0. What was the pre-image or the inverse of 5? Well, looking at my picture, I know that 1 went to 5, so if I go backwards, 5 goes to 1. And similarly, the inverse of 8 should give me 2. All right, and that makes sense in a picture. We went one way for the f, and we go backwards for the f inverse. Now, the question is, how do you find that on paper? So there are a few steps to do. So the steps to find the inverse. And we'll find the inverse of y equals 3x plus 2. Step 1, you interchange x and y. So instead of y equals 3x plus 2, I'm going to have x equals 3y plus 2. Next, you solve for y. Y plus 2. If I subtract 2 from both sides, on the left-hand side I have x minus 2, and on the right I have 3y. Solving for y, I will now divide by 3, and so I have y equals x minus 2 all over 3. For the last step, you want to replace y with f inverse of x. So our final answer here would be f inverse of x equals x minus 2 all over 3. So if you come back over here to our picture, by the picture we said that the 2 should map backwards to the 0. Well, let's see if our formula works. So f inverse of x, supposedly that's 2. So let's plug in the 2. Our formula tells us in the numerator we have 2 minus 2 all over 3, and that's 0 over 3. Anything 0 over anything is 0. And you could go through and check the others as well.